Dear friends and allies, today, the 17th of December, is the International Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers. This is the 15th year sex worker organizations all over the world come together to remember the victims of hate crime since our first gathering as a response to the Green River killer and what allowed him to target us and get away with it for so long. It is the day we remind each other that we who sell sex are often exposed to people that for different reasons wish to harm us, both physically, mentally and economically. We especially remember the greatest victims of this violence, the ones who lost their lives. In Norway, we have lost 5 of our family that we know of since 1981. Trine Jensen, Gry Storvik, Anita Hjertevik, Rebecca Rist and Galina Sandeva. We feel the loss of their lives and every other sex worker around the world that have lost their lives to hate and from neglect by, among other, the police. We remember Galina Sandeva, who was killed by someone who was convinced that he had to kill someone and chose to target a vulnerable human that in his mind was not likely to be missed. Galina worked where the police would not find her to protect the 99% of her clients that would not hurt anyone. We remember Eva Marie Kullander Smith, who began selling sex to support her children and find a way out of her relationship with her violent and abusive ex-boyfriend. We remember how she lost custody of her children because Swedish Child Protective Services thought her children was left in better care with her violent and abusive ex-boyfriend than with a sex worker. We remember how her entire family was denied seeing her children and how she was brutally murdered by her ex-boyfriend while the children were in the room right next to her when she was finally allowed to see them again. And we remember how the same people that took her children away did not allow her parents to pay for her funeral, opting instead to pay for it themselves, using the money her children had inherited from their murdered mother. We remember Vanessa Campos, a transgender sex worker who was brutally murdered while protecting a client from a gang that regularly targeted clients of sex workers. Vanessa worked in an unsafe place, away from police to protect her clients, while working to help her family in her home country. We remember all the other 368 transgender people who have been reported dead the last year, 62% of which were sex workers. Human beings exposed to hate and discrimination from several angles, often relying on sex work as their only way of income, and knowingly risking even more stigma and hate because the alternative was even worse. We remember all of us that have been exposed to mental abuse and driven to breakdowns and even suicide by members of the public, by those meant to protect us, even by our own friends and family, and most of all, by our self-appointed saviors. Remember all the transgender sex workers on advertising sites that were brutally beaten by a known man in Oslo. We remember how after we started warning trans women about him, he went after cis women. And how after a lot of great work by dedicated people warning cis women on those sites about him, he went after street workers. We still feel the pain and hopelessness of knowing that none of his victims want to contact the police, because reporting a violent crime to the police may be either futile or worse, bring upon us more punishment than he would ever receive. And we remember and share the pain of our elected families of other sex workers every time one of us is kicked out of an apartment, a job, a country, or denied any other right or service, simply because we refuse to choose a less preferable life or even death over having payment being one of our conditions for sexual consent. Every time an attempt to save us leaves us without any income, every time one of us are kicked out on the street without anything in order to protect us from ourselves, every time we are harassed by the police when we are trying to report a sexual assault, every time our saviors feel more like religious crusaders, we all feel the pain. Finally, it is the day we grow and become better human beings, because we listen to the stories. We learn from the past. We teach each other how to defeat and prevent violence and hate. We learn what works and what harms more than it helps. Let us together end this crusade against sex workers. It is about damn time that we who have fought for sexual freedom through the ages finally get to enjoy that freedom ourselves without fearing for our safety. Before we move on, I would like to call on 1 minute of silence to remember and honor our fallen family members. Trine, Gry, Anita, Rebecca, Galina, Eva Marie, Vanessa, and all other murdered sex workers. Thank you all. And we now give the word to Patricia.
As in many countries, sex workers are at a high risk of violence and abuse, also in Norway. The violence they encounter comes at the hands of a range of perpetrators, including clients, members of the public, third parties involved in sex work, and organized gangs who prey on sex workers, capitalizing on their isolation and marginalized status. Regrettably, many sex workers risk eviction, police surveillance, loss of livelihood and deportation if they engage with the police. Mercy, a Nigerian sex worker, described her experiences of discrimination, social exclusion and human rights abuses, including violence in Norway. She told Amnesty, "A little guy came to the house with a knife. I answered the door and he threatened us with a knife and robbed our money and our cell phones. He forced us to have sex with him. The police took 2 to 3 hours to come, and when they came, they took us to the hospital. We went to a hotel later on and stayed there for 2 nights. But when we came back to our apartment, the landlord threw us out. The police had put a pressure on her. She gave us half a day to get out, and I wandered around in Oslo for hours with my bags in my hands until I found somewhere to stay." Mercy was forcibly evicted from her home, and the fact that she was made homeless without any due process or notice constitute a human rights violation. And this forced eviction happened because Mercy reported violence and rape to the police. This makes the treatment that she received as a sex worker in Norway even more egregious. Mercy's story is not an isolated case. Amnesty International is deeply concerned that sex workers, a group that is recognized globally as being at increased risk of violence, can face penalization in Norway when they report serious crimes including violence and rape. The criminalization of sex work in Norway and the reluctance it creates amongst many sex workers to report crime to the police is also creating a situation whereby the perpetrators of violence against sex workers, including abusive clients, enjoyed relative impunity for serious criminal offences. The legal model that has been adopted by the Norwegian government is promoted as one that encourages protection of people who sell sex, that shields them from criminalization and instead shifts the criminal burden of blame to the buyers of sex. Despite this, Amnesty International has found evidence of human rights violations against people who sell sex in Norway that are compounded by, and in some cases directly caused by, this legal framework. Amnesty International encourages the authorities to undertake a program of legal reform that decriminalizes adult consensual sex work and ensures legal protection from all forms of discrimination, exploitation and violence for people who sell sex in compliance with international human rights standards. Thank you for your attention.
Halvor Frihagen from Fri.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you here today, and thank to you all for being here. It is cold today, and we know that many of those among us who are active in sex work have a lot of experience keeping warm in cold streets. And just because of that, it's nice to see so many of you here despite the cold weather, to show that more of us should have the right to safety, the right to life, and the right to work without violence. When one among us is a victim of violence and hatred, it affects us all. But some of us are more at risk of crime than others. Hate directs itself at who we are, who we love, how we express our gender, and what we do or what we do not do with our bodies. Hate crime is a particularly serious kind of crime because it attacks who we are and what we can't escape. And it creates fear in those who are like us. A fear that we ourselves will be a victim of hate or a victim of crime. We also know that too few are convicted of hate crime. Few cases are reported. Few cases among those reported are recognized as hate crime, and few cases lead to conviction. And that's why we in Free work to strengthen the implementation and the enforcement of the Hate Crime Act. But we won't settle at that, because hate crime is a more serious kind of crime. After many years of fighting, we are very soon going to get hate crime protection to those among us who are trans. This amendment is coming late. It's very welcome, but it is not enough, because still, in the Act, only a few groups are found worthy of this protection by the Storting. All groups at risk of hate crime need protection, not only the worthy groups that are decided by the politicians here behind us. We know that those among us who are involved in sex work have little confidence in the police, and often for a very good reason. The police should protect a person at risk, a possible victim of trafficking and a victim of crime. Instead, far too often, the police treat the victim as a possible criminal. They start investigating the person they should protect. They investigate the victim, the person reporting a crime, and they do that to enforce an act that was made with the intention of helping and protecting persons involved in sex work. It doesn't make any sense at all. Those among us who are involved in sex work are at risk of hate crime, and they have a lot in common with other groups who are victims of hate crime. The hatred of persons involved in sex work goes hand in hand with hatred of gays, lesbians, bisexuals and trans people. It's not about who they are, but the group they are a part of, or the group that other people think they are a part of. It's about time that hate crime against sex workers is recognized at what it is. It's hate crime. Every single person who is more at risk of crime because they are part of a group or because others think they are part of a group should have legal protection. Those among us involved in sex work need that protection more than most. That's why we're here, that's why we're fighting this fight, and that's why we'll continue to challenge the cold weather with you.
Konstanse Løfors.
Hi, my name is Konstanse and I'm Vice President of Young Liberals of Norway, Unge Venstre. I'm a liberal and I believe everyone should have the freedom to make their own choices regarding their own lives. But liberalism is not just about freedom to, it's also about freedom from force, freedom from violence, and freedom from discrimination. Today, most sex workers are not free from these things. I represent the Liberal Party Venstre. We voted against the law changes in 2009 that prohibit purchasing sexual services and renting out apartments to sex workers or in any other way promoting their work. We are still opposed to the criminalization of the purchase of sex and have stated in our program for Parliament that we wish to repeal the Act. Several times we have requested an answer on how these laws on sex work improve the situation for sex workers and how it prevents trafficking. However, have so not received an answer. These laws don't prevent trafficking and they don't prevent violence. Rather, they escalate violence and break down the trust between sex workers and police. Police resources are being used to track down sex workers and throw them out of their homes. Sex workers have low trust towards public authorities as a consequence, and many fear reporting violent customers. These laws do not protect sex workers. They put them in danger, and it's time to abolish them. We need a social security system that ensures no one is left with sex work as the only option. We need to strengthen the organizations that support sex workers and provide health care. And we need to offer protection to victims of trafficking so they are able to witness against traffickers. We need a police force that offers sex workers more safety instead of less. We will continue to work for change and fight to end injustice towards sex workers. Thank you.
Marianne Mikalsen from Senteret.
We meet people who sell sex every day, and I want to start by reading a story that was told to us by a woman working on the streets. I meet a client on the street and we go to a hotel room. He gives me the money, we have sex, but then he wants the money back. He beats me, but I manage to get back onto the street. He follows me, he hits me again. People are watching, but nobody cares. He beats me one last time and then he leaves. Nobody helped me. This is the reality for many sex workers. And it's something we at Senteret often hear about. People who sell sex are more likely to become victims of violence than the rest of the population. The attitude of society is that when you sell sex, violence is something you must expect. Many are afraid to report because they are worried about what might happen when they go to the police. We have met people who have experienced extreme violence and who have been sent out of the country when they reported this to the police. Immigration policies appear to be more important than the right to protection. Others are afraid to give their address, which is required when you report a crime, because of fear of being thrown out of their apartment. No one in our society should be exposed to violence, regardless of who you are, what you do, and what your line of work is. Senteret demands protection, a special protection for people who sell sex, and a protection against violence, regardless of residency status. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming today. This is a really important day. We have to learn from the past. We have to be able to look to a brighter future. Thank you everyone.